Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Botox Games. October has come to a close, or it's about to. Happy Halloween, by the way. But Nintendo had a very weird month, and I kind of want to just recap everything they announced and how, in the end, while we didn't get a September Direct, we kind of had constant Nintendo news throughout all of October. October was actually kind of packed with new Nintendo announcements. Let's talk about it. Alrighty, folks, welcome back to the channel. I hope your day is treating you well. So yeah, it's October 31st. I think a lot of us were hoping for some sort of Switch 2 reveal this month. That is obviously not happening at this point. Maybe we'll get some sort of mention during the investor meeting on November 5th, but as it stands right now, I think most people are jumping ship to Team 2025 when it comes to that dang Switch 2 reveal. However, as someone who just cares about video games, and really I just want to see the Switch 2 so I can see more video games, this month was actually really good because Nintendo surprised us by announcing a ton of stuff. We had the weird Switch playtest announced, we had Xenoblade Chronicles X, we had a ton of NSO support, and I think I want to start there, and we'll kind of go in order here, but this month, October as a whole, seemingly was just them trying to get you to resub to Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack. That is what I got from the entire month. Some of the things they added were for the standard tier, but they announced like 4 or 5 pretty big things for Switch Online owners this month, and I think because we didn't get a September Direct, maybe this was always going to be the case, right? Maybe they knew they weren't going to do a September Direct. Maybe they knew the only game they had to announce this year was Xenoblade Chronicles X, for example, and they knew they had all this weird stuff like Pocket Camp Complete and Alarmo and Nintendo Music, right? So they figured, hey, let's just have October be pretty full of Nintendo news just on Twitter. That way, if it's a Direct, people won't be disappointed that the only new game is Xenoblade Chronicles X or something like that, right? And then that way, they also don't have to prepare all those different marketing materials and get all that different stuff ready. They only needed to prepare a trailer for Xenoblade Chronicles X, but it started on October 1st, you know? That day, we actually got a major new update for F-Zero 99, when I think most people had kind of given up on F-Zero 99 even getting new content. We had these Satellaview tracks added, we had new machine decals added, we had a more expanded practice mode added, as well as an entirely new league. This is something that I think people weren't really expecting. And once again, it goes to the theory that, you know, I think they were just trying to give us that big boost of NSO content so that we would want to resubscribe, because NSO started in September, but also the expansion pack started in October. So because we didn't have that September Direct where they normally have that big new addition to NSO for the year, you know, last year was F-Zero 99, years prior it was, you know, N64, years prior it was Mario 35, SNES, right? So usually they like to have like one thing around this time of year that's a pretty big drawback in to NSO. So while we didn't have one major thing this time, we had a bunch of little things, and I think F-Zero 99 getting such a major new free update is just part of that, you know, that entire scheme they had of just trying to get us to resubscribe. Because on that same day, on October 1st, they also announced the F-Zero GBA games were coming over. So we had F-Zero Climax as well as Grand Prix announced for NSO. Those came out, I believe, on October 11th. So that right there, that's another major draw for NSO expansion pack members, because, you know, F-Zero Climax had never been localized. So for a lot of people, that was basically kind of a new F-Zero game, which is really exciting. So off the bat, you know, October 1st, we're already getting 2 pretty big deal announcements for NSO. And then a week later, we had something that definitely would not have fit in a Nintendo Direct. We had Nintendo Sound Clock Alarmo announced. Nintendo doesn't announce stuff like this in a Nintendo Direct. They also want to announce Nintendo Music in a Nintendo Direct. So I really do think the reason we didn't get that September showcase is because they wanted to just have all of these different Twitter announcements in one month, kind of in October, and they knew October was going to be their big marketing month for all these new random products that don't really fit in a Nintendo Direct, right? Pocket Camp Complete does not fit in a Nintendo Direct. Alarmos, Nintendo Music, even F-Zero 99 getting an update, like they would talk about that in a Direct, but it's not enough to make a Direct worthwhile, right? So Alarmo was a really big thing they did this month that nobody was really expecting up until a couple days before, when we started seeing the, I think that was the FTC filings for that. And yeah, Alarmo's a huge deal. But then that same day, and this one was really weird as well, they announced the Nintendo Switch playtest program. This is another major draw, I would say, for Nintendo Switch Online owners to resubscribe. The playtest, I think, started right around the time that N64 games got added 2 years prior, maybe 3 years prior. So it felt like with the playtest, they were trying to explicitly get people to resubscribe just to get in, even though only 10,000 people got in. But this is just another case of them doing something very weird that probably wouldn't have really made sense in a Nintendo Direct showcase. So I just feel like that was kind of the theme of the month, right? Now, this next thing isn't an announcement, but it is heavily related to Nintendo, and it was all over the news for Nintendo fans this month. We had the major Pokemon Game Freak data leak. We had so much information come out about past games, as well as a little bit of information on future games. We heard that maybe Legends EA was originally intended to release in 2024, but they delayed it. We heard about this Project Synapse game, which sounds like some sort of multiplayer hero shooter kind of esque Pokemon thing where you ride Pokemon. We heard a little bit about Generation 10 and its location, and then ultimately, like I said, we heard a lot about past games, which, while it wasn't tied into Nintendo's marketing, just talking about October as a whole for Nintendo fans, I feel like I had to mention that because that's still going on. That is an absolutely massive leak that will have ramifications for probably years to come at this point, which is just absolutely crazy. Then, of course, in the middle of the month, Mario Party Jamboree release, a huge deal, great game. But then that same day, actually, the day that Mario Party Jamboree came out, they announced that Banjo-Tooie was coming to NSO, which that in of itself isn't that weird. It gets weirder when we get to the next NSO announcement they made this month. But Banjo-Tooie being announced so close to F-Zero Climax and Grand Prix, I think also just kind of further solidifies the idea that they wanted people to resubscribe. They almost never do 2 expansion pack specific Nintendo NSO drops back to back. Normally, they'll do one that's for the expansion pack, so they'll do like a Game Boy Advance game. Then they'll go back and do an SNES game for the standard tier. And then they'll go back and do an N64 game. They almost never do them back to back. But as we see later on in the month, that they actually did that 3 times. They actually added on Monday this past week, they added Shadow Man as well as Turok 2. So we got 3 pretty major NSO drops for expansion pack members in the same month on top of the playtest. That's really weird. That's never happened before. I think this one might be a little bit more of an incidental thing with Universal and the timing lining up, but they announced that Nintendo World will be opening at Universal Orlando Resort on May 22nd, 2025. So once again, another major thing that really wouldn't have made sense in a Nintendo Direct. And then we get to this past week, which has just been packed with announcements. We had Animal Crossing Pocket Camp Complete announced for a release date of December 2nd. We knew this was coming, but we didn't know when. I think they might have said October specifically, but at the very least, they said we'll share more details later this year. That's a big deal. Once again, another thing that would not make sense in a Nintendo Direct. It's a mobile game. They don't show mobile stuff in their Nintendo Directs. Very rarely, I think they might have mentioned Pikmin Bloom once, but very rarely will they talk about a Nintendo mobile game in a Direct showcase. And here we have one that, once again, just makes sense to announce on Twitter, being Pocket Camp Complete, which is a big deal. It's not technically a new thing, but it's also our next paid Animal Crossing release, right? Like, I think a lot of people probably didn't play Pocket Camp who will now be going in and trying this out now that it is going to be this offline experience, this kind of single player focus experience. So Pocket Camp Complete was a huge deal, I would say, towards the end of the month. Then, like I said, that same day we had a Shadow Man and Turok 2 added to the Switch Online and Mature 17 Plus app, and as well as there were some fixes for like Perfect Dark and stuff, I believe, because there was some emulation issues there. But that's 3 major NSO classic games added to the expansion pack tier all in 1 month, which is just really weird. I mean, within the span of 3 weeks. Now, I guess you can make the argument, well, they did this because, they wanted to get these out for Halloween. These are kind of like horror-themed N64 games. And that may be the case, but the fact they did it so close to Banjo-Tooie either way is still weird. They could have saved Banjo-Tooie for next month or something. But no, they went all in on the expansion pack tier this month, I assume, to really get you to just kind of resubscribe. And then the next day later, they announced Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition on October 29th. This is definitely the biggest announcement of the month. And when I saw this, my initial gut thinking was like, well, why didn't they just do a Nintendo Direct? I think the answer is just because they didn't have enough substantial content to really make doing a Direct worth it. Now, I'm not saying they couldn't have, and I'm sure a lot of us would have eaten it up, but let's say Xenoblade Chronicles X is the only game releasing by March 20th of next year. Let's say there is no February game, like I've talked about, maybe being Kirby Planet Robobot or some sort of 3DS remaster. If Xenoblade Chronicles is the only game releasing before the end of their fiscal year, so March 31st, it doesn't really make that much sense to announce it as early as September. If they have games releasing in April or May on the current Switch, they can wait until January, frankly, even February, to announce those and either, another Nintendo Direct or on Twitter. Now, Xenoblade Chronicles X being announced on Twitter is extremely weird, right? Like, we have not seen them announce such a significant game on Twitter since, I believe, back in, I want to say, 2020, right? So we had Pikmin 3 Deluxe, Origami King, as well as Hyrule Warriors. All 3 of those games were announced on Twitter because they weren't doing Nintendo Directs back then. They did some partner showcases during COVID, but there was no like major Nintendo Direct that year, so they announced their major games on Twitter. They also had Mario 35 announced in the Mario 35 Direct, but in terms of like their major new games that year, they announced pretty much all of them on Twitter. The only other time they've announced a decently sized first-party Nintendo game on Twitter since then was Kirby's Dream Buffet back in 2022, a summer that they similarly did not have a Nintendo Direct. But Xenoblade X is definitely the biggest announcement since Hyrule Warriors to just be dropped on Twitter. And, I've seen some people speculating like, oh, they're done with the Nintendo Direct format. I think part of it, too, might be their whole, the Switch successor will not be mentioned in this presentation thing. If you missed that back in the June Direct, they said, hey, we're not going to talk about the Switch successor in this. Even I think the Museum Direct, they actually had to clarify and say there will be no mention of the Switch 2 or the Switch successor in the showcase. I think it might be tied to that. I think part of it might just be they didn't want to do another Direct where they had to say that. Maybe they want to kind of build up this suspense and build up this hype, and then next time we see a Nintendo Direct announced, they don't have to add that, right? Though, yes, it is definitely more likely they just don't have any other games to announce at this exact time. Now, as of when I'm recording this, people are still expecting some sort of other thing. Pure was kind of teasing maybe a revival of an old IP or another remaster. I still think if anything else is getting announced this year for early next, a 3DS remaster, specifically Kirby Planet Robobot or Triple Deluxe, makes the most sense. Maybe Kid Icarus, that's me coping, I think, but maybe we get one more thing. But as it stands, with all of these weird spreadshot announcements, a Nintendo Direct in September could have worked, right? Like I said, we would have eaten it up. But if Xenoblade X was their big announcement, then that would have been disappointing for a lot of people. We have to understand, as Xenoblade Chronicles fans and defenders, Xenoblade Chronicles is not something that the majority of the Switch install base cares about or will play. They did end the September 2019 Direct with a Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, but that was also a Direct that had a lot of other games in it. They had Overwatch, they had Luigi's Mansion 3, they had Link's Awakening, though I guess in general that might be a bad example because the September 2019 Direct wasn't very good. But you see what I mean, though? If they had a September Direct and their biggest announcement, their only new first-party announcement was Xenoblade Chronicles X, a lot of people would have walked away pretty disappointed with that. And if Metroid Prime 4 isn't ready to show for some reason, maybe they don't want to show that game again. If we went that Direct without seeing Prime 4, that would have been another layer of people being disappointed. So when you look at it from that perspective, I think it really does start to make sense why they didn't do their standard September showcase. Now, counterpoint, why didn't they just announce Xenoblade Chronicles X on Twitter in September, right? Why didn't they just have any of this news in September? September was a wasteland for Nintendo news, and for some reason they squeezed it all into October. I'm not sure about that. They could have easily put Xenoblade in September. I'm sure the game is done. I'm sure this trailer has been done, right? They could have announced it then. But no, they decided to wait until October for some reason or another. And then, yeah, of course, just yesterday, Nintendo at 3 p.m. Pacific, a very weird time for them, announced Nintendo Music, which is, once again, just another incentive for Nintendo Switch Online subscribers. It's not exclusive to the expansion pack, but it is something that you need Switch Online to use, and it is basically Nintendo Spotify. I made a video kind of reacting to it and talking about it when it was breaking news yesterday, and I was talking about how I don't really care about this. I'm not going to use this. Man, I love this app. This app is actually really cool. I understand it'd be better if it was just on Spotify or YouTube Music and it was all officially supported on there. But having a specific place to go listen to some of the best video game music of all time, having their custom playlists for sleep music. I like having background noise when I sleep. So actually I did that last night where I slept to a lot of the KK Lullaby stuff, very peaceful music. I love how they have little screenshots for each song, kind of showing you hey, this is what's happening in the game when you're hearing this specific track. It's actually pretty cool. It's not for everybody, absolutely, but I've come around on it quite a bit. I actually think this is a really cool addition to an SO, but it, once again, is a weird addition. This is not something that really would have made sense in a Nintendo Direct because it's not gaming related. This is something totally different. It's like Alarmo. It's like them announcing the release date for Super Nintendo World being May 22nd next year. These are all things just showing that Nintendo is growing and becoming more than just a video game developer and publisher, right? Nintendo has completely broken out of that at this point where they're releasing alarm clocks, they're making movies, they have theme parks. It's not just video games. And while maybe in the future we will see more of these lifestyle applications and devices added to Nintendo Directs as announcements, we just don't really have a precedent for that. So I think seemingly Nintendo doesn't want to show them in those types of showcases. But yeah, I mean, to wrap it all up, just to kind of recap the entire month, what an insane month, right? That was a ton of Nintendo news, on top of the fact that we actually got the playtest. We had it announced, and then Nintendo didn't really tweet about it. It happened, I think, October 23rd is when it dropped, or October 24th, and that was a huge deal. It leaked, and Nintendo was taking down videos. It has been a very interesting month for Nintendo fans, as like I said, I think most people were expecting some sort of Switch to reveal this month. It just kind of lined up with the past example being the Switch, which was also announced in October, a week before their investor meeting. I and many others thought that we would see the Switch 2 this week or this month or sometime in October, also September. We also thought that, but that was because there was a lack of a September Direct. But now that we see all of the announcements they actually had in store for us, I think it does kind of make a little bit more sense why we didn't get one to begin with. Maybe we'll still get more. Maybe we'll get some more in early November. I do think Pokemon Legends EA is something we are not going to wait until Pokemon Day next year to see that game. I truly believe that. I do think we will see something from Pokemon this year. Prime 4 is something I could see them maybe waiting until December at the Game Awards to show. And then maybe next year, yeah, we just get more Twitter announcements. Maybe if they have a Fire Emblem remake for April or something, they could announce that on Twitter. I mean, if they're still willing to announce something like Xenoblade X on Twitter, they're definitely willing to announce a Kirby or a Fire Emblem remaster on Twitter, right? So unprecedented times, I suppose, right? We'll have to wait and see when they actually decide to mention the Switch 2. I do think, ultimately, it all does kind of tie back to that as much as people are sick of it. If they didn't have the Switch 2 to announce within the next couple of months, we probably would have just gotten a pretty lackluster Direct. I think they would have understood, like, okay, we want people to just kind of, have their Direct. They know to expect a Direct around this time. We got to do it for them. But because they know we're, like, anticipating the Switch 2, I feel like they know they can kind of drag this along and keep the hype cycle going for that console. But, yeah, I would love to hear what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think of Nintendo's movements in October? It was an absolutely wild month, and it's been a lot of fun covering it. I know some people get sick of the Switch 2 chatter. I know some people don't like when I talk about the playtest because it was under NDA or whatever. But, man, it's been a lot of fun covering all of this randomness. This has been a very interesting month as a Nintendo fan, and I would love to hear what you guys think down in the comments below. Of course, subscribe here for more Nintendo Switch news, content, coverage, all that fun stuff. Follow me on Twitter at BoTalksGames, and until next time, folks, peace.